Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kate Good. I'm the Executive Director of the Parish Resource Center and delighted to be able to do this event with the folks from Union today. So a couple of housekeeping pieces first before we get started. Feel free, because it's a small group today, we have a lot of folks who will also be watching the recording, to unmute yourself if you have questions, or you can also chat them. I know some of you submitted questions ahead of time, so we'll also make sure that those are asked and answered as well. So thank you again for coming, and happy to turn this over to Jackie.
Good afternoon, everyone. So happy to be here with all of you. We are going to share a little bit about COVID vaccines, try to answer as many questions as possible. My name is Jackie Concepcion. I'm the Vice President of Community Impact at Union Community Care. And I'd like to introduce my partner, Dr. Anne-Marie Derrico, and she can introduce herself. And she is our Chief Medical Officer, and she will also be, running through some of the more specifics on the COVID vaccine. So, Dr. Derrico.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Ann Derrico. I'm a family physician and the Chief Medical Officer at Community Care. And this morning, I think I'll start if we want to get right into slides.
Yeah, I will share my screen.
Thanks. So I'm going to just give some background. I guess our first slide is, go ahead, you can go to the next one. It's just a little bit about Union. Our purpose is to spark equity through patient-led healthcare that welcomes and strengthens our communities by integrating body, mind, and heart. And our vision is a vibrant and healthy community supported by inclusive healthcare that embraces each member's unique culture, needs, and values, and emboldens them to make healthful choices that fuel their well-being and the well-being of others. So today, as we talk about the COVID vaccines, I wanted to be here to provide you with information, I'm sure much of which you already know, but also information that I hope is useful to you to bring back to your communities and to help, increase confidence in vaccines and increase the amount of vaccination that we can accomplish in our community. So the first vaccines that were approved or were given emergency use authorization by the FDA were both the Pfizer and then the Moderna vaccines. As you probably know, they were a new type of vaccine that used messenger RNA. And what we like to explain or use the analogy of an email. So messenger RNA is like an email. It tells your immune system what the virus looks like, gives it instructions to kill it, and then it disappears. And this technology actually was being developed about 30 years ago. It doesn't actually contain the virus, unlike traditional vaccines. So it was definitely, excuse me, my phone's ringing, something new for us at this time, but something that had been in development for many, many years. And the reason it was kind of effective for COVID is because they're actually really much faster to make. And when the pandemic struck, scientists who were working on mRNA technology, quickly pivoted to work with COVID. And I like to share the story of Dr. Corbett because she is a Black female physician and scientist who was integral in the development of the Moderna vaccine. Both were developed using, traditional safety protocols, adequate testing, good clinical trials that were just expedited and happened very quickly. There was a lot of funding, probably 9, 10, 11 months ago to rapidly begin developing a vaccine for this new virus that we had seen. It was devastating our world. And so both vaccines, like almost miraculously, were incredibly effective. They are 94 to 96% effective in preventing you from really getting sick at all from COVID, and they're all 100% effective in preventing hospitalizations and death after your second shot. So both vaccines are a 2-shot series, and their height of effectiveness occurs 2 weeks after that second shot. Now, our new vaccine on the on the scene that made the news tremendously this week, but I want to talk about it because I do think the J&J Janssen vaccine is going to come back into play. It's not an mRNA vaccine. It's an adenovirus vaccine. It works differently. An adenovirus is a type of virus that causes a common cold, and the vaccine technology uses an inactive form of that virus to act as a carrier, to deliver a gene from the coronavirus into our bodies to help produce coronavirus proteins. So not the virus itself. And then the proteins pretend to be the virus, help to be our immune system understand how to fight the virus and develop an immune response. The very, very nice thing about the J&J vaccine is it's only one shot, and it's effective 2 weeks after that one shot. And though if you look like just at the numbers, it appears it's slightly less effective in preventing COVID illness. 72% effective is the number that you'll see. It is still 100% effective in preventing death and hospitalization. It also is a little hard to compare the J&J vaccine with the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine because the trials were done a little bit differently. And probably more importantly is that the J&J vaccine was in its clinical trials later when there were all these, a number of new variants out. And so in some sense, we don't really know the effectiveness of the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine against some of the new variants, but we do know the J&J vaccine is very effective against the variants that were circulating at the time of the trials, particularly the South African variant. So a lot of people worry that the J&J vaccine is not as effective, and I think it's just as effective. It was also trialed on a much more diverse patient population than the other two vaccines. Many of the participants in the trials were Latinx or Black, and they were done in locations where the new variants were circulating, as I've said, and a lot of it done in Latin America and in South Africa. So if you have questions maybe at the end about some of the recent news about the J&J vaccine, that's a whole nother topic. As you know, right now it's on pause, but I feel like my opinion is that it may get some conditional approval again, and we may be seeing it used in the United States and particularly locally. I do think it's an excellent vaccine. Next slide, please. So here are some facts, some key facts about the COVID-19 vaccines. They don't give you COVID-19. They won't cause you to test positive on a COVID test. The vaccine will help you from getting sick from COVID-19 and is essentially 100% in preventing death and hospitalization from COVID. They don't alter your DNA. The vaccine is free. There's been no links between the vaccine and miscarriage or infertility. There's no dangerous ingredients. There's no fetal cells or eggs or preservatives in the vaccines. When folks are vaccinated, we're not asking immigration status. We're not considering that in terms of vaccinating patients. And everyone's getting the same available real vaccines. One of the newer updates from the CDC is that people who are completely vaccinated still need to wear a mask after getting the vaccine. But when you're with other fully vaccinated people, you actually are permitted to be maskless, and you don't need to quarantine if you've come in contact with someone who's COVID positive. Again, that's after you've been fully vaccinated, so 2 weeks after your final dose, depending on your final dose of the vaccine. Go ahead, next slide. So again, the vaccine is 100% effective in preventing hospitalization and death, and it's really unlikely you'll get any COVID symptoms post-vaccination. Vaccine also, it appears, protects people around you from getting COVID. There's still a little bit of question, 100% of whether you could transmit virus once you've been vaccinated, but it seems like the evidence is becoming more and more clear that people after they've received the vaccine are not transmitting COVID. Even if you've had COVID in the past, you'd benefit from getting vaccinated. The immune response from the vaccine is felt to be much stronger than your natural immune response after having COVID. And of course, the vaccine's the safest way to build protection in our communities, and really a critically important tool to help end this pandemic. So it is important, though, to tell people that you probably will have some side effects after getting the vaccine, particularly after the second dose. Generally, it's flu-like symptoms, aches, sometimes a low fever, fatigue. It's not COVID, it's just your immune response to the vaccine. Most people feel those side effects more acutely after the second dose if it's a 2-dose vaccine. Some people do have those symptoms after the first dose. You can take over-the-counter medicine after you've gotten the vaccine. And for most people, those side effects only last 24 hours, occasionally 48, but usually people feel fine 1 to 2 days after that second dose. But I think it's important to be transparent with people. And then just some numbers. It was fun to see the updates of this slide since the last time we gave this presentation. So we've administered more than 190 million doses of COVID vaccine in the US. And in Pennsylvania, 7.7 million. In Lancaster County, 176,000 doses. And in Lebanon County, 39,460 doses. So that's another sort of talking point about the vaccine to people, that sure, there were these clinical trials at the beginning and the FDA felt like the vaccines were safe enough to approve. And now really we just have more and more and more evidence that the vaccine is safe and effective as we've given out millions and millions and millions of doses. And so I don't know, Jackie, do you want to talk now or do you want me to talk this slide?
Unmute. Sorry, I was talking to myself. So we are now vaccinating all adults. So as of Tuesday, the Department of Health and the governor announced that all adults 18 and older can be scheduled to have an appointment and get vaccinated. If they are being vaccinated with Pfizer, I think Pfizer allows 16 and up. So again,
yes, that's correct. You're right.
Yeah.
Pfizer 16 and up.
Yeah. So what we are trying to do at Union Community Care is really partner with organizations as yours to hit those target populations that are the most vulnerable, that we think may not be able to get. So you all know we have this max vaccination center at Park City at the Bonton, and they're doing a phenomenal job in getting a lot of people vaccinated every single day. Their goal is to do about 5,000 a day. And that's awesome, and they're doing a fantastic job. But our goal is to sort of be a little bit more targeted and focused in hard-to-reach populations, the elderly, those more vulnerable. For example, in Lebanon, we did an event with the Office of Aging and the Transportation Office to get 120 seniors that would otherwise not be able to get to a max vaccination center get vaccinated, and it was excellent. It was a partnership to get those people vaccinated. Here in Lancaster, we're trying to do small pop-ups. For example, this week we were out vaccinating the homeless. So we were on Tuesday at the Water Street Rescue Mission, and we're looking at going to some of these smaller homeless shelters and daycare centers to provide vaccines to the unsheltered. So we are looking at partnering with organizations like yourselves, that if you feel that in your area there is a lack of vaccine or access to the vaccine, or people are not able for whatever reason get to the big vaccination centers, then we can meet those needs by going on site and vaccinating. So we have right now, all of our sites are vaccinating. We have 4 sites in Lancaster City. We have 1 in New Holland and 1 in Lebanon. And these are the numbers that you can contact, and you can call and try to get an appointment to get vaccinated. We are currently vaccinating only with the Moderna. We have to pause the JNJ this past week, but hopefully once that is available again, we will start using that. So we're looking at pop-up vaccine events throughout Lancaster County, and Lebanon to make sure that those vulnerable populations are getting vaccinated. So what is our role of as a community health center? So we know that those affected the most by COVID were Latino, Hispanic, Black, and Brown communities. So if you look at the disparities, you look at the numbers, the ones that were hit the hardest with the COVID, infections and the death, that was the population that was hit the hardest. So we want to make sure that this population gets vaccinated. So we're seeing some of that disparities. So if you look at some of the numbers, the majority of the people that are getting vaccinated are more the white community, opposed to some of the more vulnerable Black and Brown communities. So we want to make that is a high priority for us as well. Community health centers like Union Community Care are in the forefront. We've been in the forefront since the pandemic hit of vaccine equity and equality, proactively working with community partners to vaccinate our most vulnerable. So that's a high priority for us right now. We are identifying all the angles of equity: race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, poverty, education, geography, transportation challenges, language barriers, and ability level. So that's our key role. And you've probably heard, the new administration and the governor talk about a lot of efforts with community, they call us federally qualified health centers and community health centers. It's because we are usually in the community. We're trusted healthcare centers in the community that people know who we are, where we are, and it's easy for us to make that connection and have people come in and feel confident in getting vaccinated. So our high priority for us right now too is to collaborate. We can't do this alone. So we know our patient population, but we want to partner with others that also feel that there is a void, and making sure that we can get people vaccinated. We want to help build vaccine confidence. So making sure that the right message with the right messengers are getting out to the community. So we all know that people listen to certain people and not to other people. Like if, a big star is on TV saying, hey, get vaccinated, that may not mean anything to our, your grandma down the street. But if she sees a church pastor that she really trusts saying, hey, you should get the vaccine, that may make a huge difference to that person getting the vaccine or not getting the vaccine. So building that confidence to help people understand the importance of getting vaccinated. So how can you help vaccinate our communities? So one, get vaccinated so you could be the role model. Building the defenses against COVID-19 in our community is team effort. It needs to be all of us. And each of you are a key part of that defense. Community health centers are working together with all the healthcare systems to vaccinate the community members as quickly as possible. So we work with Penn Medicine, WellSpan, to making sure that we are spread out through the county. We have a huge county. So we want to make sure that if people are not getting to the big vaccination centers, they can go to other locations. So we are all trying to work together. Be mindful and informed. That's why we're having these community chats. Many of us have lost a deeply loved family member to COVID. There's been a huge loss in our community of people that have died because of COVID. People are hopeful. They're also worried and sometimes confused because there's a lot of misinformation out on social media about the vaccine. So we want to make sure that the information that they get is factual and the real thing. So if they receive that information, for example, what you heard from Dr. Derrico, and then you take that information and you provide it to your community members, that is what we want. It's factual information coming from reliable sources. We don't want people to be confused or misinformed. So we're here today having this conversation with you to address fears and questions that are bubbling up in the community to keep you informed with facts. So talk about it. Now is the time to have real, open, and honest conversations with your family, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers. This will go a long way into building vaccine confidence in our communities and trust that throughout this pandemic, we can, get to the other side and help our community really become, have that herd immunity so we can return to normal. We want to fight misinformation and making sure that people are getting the right and correct information. So we're going to open it up and allow you to ask us some questions. We had some questions that were already sent to us. but we want to make sure that any concerns or questions that you are hearing from the communities that you serve, that we're able to address it. So I ask you, I know that Zoom meeting, this happens to me all the time. You start talking and you're mute and we don't know. So I think if you want to ask a question, just make sure you unmute yourself. Also, I think we're going to have some ability to have questions on the chat box. So I'll stop my share here. This is my contact information, Jackie Concepcion at UnionCom Care. I want you to know that you can reach out to us and we can talk more about our community outreach efforts if that need be. So let me stop sharing here.
There's a question in the chat that I can answer, and it asks, will the J&J vaccine help prevent the common cold? And the answer is unfortunately no. Although the vector is an adenovirus vector that is typical for the common cold, it's not active. So it is not effective in preventing the common cold.
I will jump in with some of the questions that were asked during registration already. How long should you wait to get the vaccine after testing positive for COVID?
We'll vaccinate patients as soon as they're out of their isolation period. There have been some places that have been waiting 90 days, but really that's not for safety reasons. That was really, I think, because people are presumed immune for at least 90 days. And when there was a vaccine shortage, it made sense not to use vaccine on patients who are already immune. So the real answer is that you can get it as soon as you're out of your isolation period and safe to be out in the public.
We have one in the chat of what is RNA and how is it affected by the vaccines?
I mean, RNA is a protein our body uses. I mean, you're going to push me back to like my med school biology class to really explain that. So I'm not even going to try. Probably someone in this chat might know better than me. But the answer is it's not affected. Our internal DNA is not affected by the vaccine. There's different types of RNA, and the type of RNA that the vaccine is what's called a messenger RNA, and it's really just like a recipe for producing the protein that our body can then make an immune response to. And then there's another question I see about, is it still necessary to wear a mask after being vaccinated? And the answer to that is yes. Right now, all guidelines are recommending that you remain diligent about wearing a mask and being socially distant post-vaccination because of the 100% evidence about your possibility of you transmitting COVID, even though the COVID virus doesn't make you sick post-vaccine. In theory, you may be spreading it, and so you still need to mask after being vaccinated.
Is that in public or is that in private gatherings, or what are those guidelines?
I mean, the guidelines are to mask just like you would. The exception to not masking is if you are meeting with other vaccinated people. So everybody who's completely vaccinated, because the concern is that you may still spread the virus, but if you are only going to spread it to somebody who also is vaccinated and is not going to get sick from it, then that's presumed safe. So I can tell you what we've done internally, like in our offices, is not everybody's vaccinated, but when we have meetings of people and we know everybody in that meeting is fully vaccinated, we meet without masks. We may sit around a table together, but otherwise, you know, when we're in the hallways, when we are seeing patients, of course, when we're in waiting rooms with patients or other staff, everybody wears masks and keeps their distance, just like we did a year ago. Great question. Oh, I missed one. Well, one is, how safe is it for pregnant women to get vaccinated? None of the studies, clinical trials included pregnant women, but certainly there's been plenty of pregnant women who have been vaccinated because millions of people have been vaccinated. There's been women who didn't know they were pregnant, got vaccinated, chose to get vaccinated, even though they were pregnant. All of the evidence is extremely positive that it's safe and effective for pregnant women. But it is certainly a gray area and one that we recommend that pregnant women talk to their physician about. I can tell you, I recommend it to pregnant patients, but certainly those trials did not include pregnant women. And because children cannot be vaccinated, will it be safe for me to be with my grandchildren without a mask? Great question. If you are vaccinated, if you're the grandparent, you're safe because you're not going to get sick if your grandchild is carrying COVID and transmits it to you. The risk is you transmitting it to your grandchild. And the reality is that children are rarely affected by COVID, really rarely get very sick, although occasionally they do. So the general consensus is that it's safe for children, unvaccinated children, to be around vaccinated adults without masks and in close proximity. Certainly there may be exceptions to that. If you have children with high risk pulmonary conditions that really you're afraid of them getting COVID, in theory, you even post-vaccination could transmit that to them. But your average child who's at extremely low risk of getting sick from COVID, it's presumed safe for you to do that. How do you address the excuse for not getting the vaccine? It's the government trying to control us. I mean, I would argue particularly the Pfizer vaccine, the first one that came out, kind of had nothing to do with the government. I mean, they didn't accept government money. They were scientists who rapidly pivoted, who had mRNA technology and rapidly pivoted to developing a COVID vaccine. But I can tell you that addressing conspiracy theories are challenging. So I get tired of wasting my breath. I try and point back to the science. But there's no evidence to me that a vaccination campaign is representative of governmental control. I don't know, Jack, if you have any other non-medical thoughts on that.
I always go back and say, look, this is a global pandemic. It's not our government per se. I mean, this is everywhere in every part of the world. They're experiencing this pandemic. So I always try to shift it to really, if it was just one country, but it's everywhere, and we're all trying to do our part to really mitigate the spread of this pandemic and saving lives. Sometimes bringing it back to the fact that we've lost over 500,000 people, and we don't want to continue losing people and our family members and our elderly. And those are the facts. Those people have died, and I like to bring that back, and sometimes that helps.
There's another question. At this point, though, we don't know if it's any safer to be with grandchildren being vaccinated. I think the point is certainly the safest is for everybody you're meeting with to be vaccinated. But of all of the patient population to hang out with unvaccinated, children seem extremely safe. They don't seem to get very sick with COVID. They don't seem to spread COVID. I mean, there's been very good evidence that school closures have not been effective in preventing the spread of COVID, because despite what we really thought a year ago and hypothesized that schools might be incubators for COVID, they actually have not really panned out to be, because this virus doesn't affect especially school-age children very profoundly. And so certainly the safest is to be with only vaccinated people, but I think especially school-age children could be the exception. And is there any way to know if someone's had the vaccination? Will it show up on a scan? I mean, I think the answer to that is no.
I'll pop in with another question. Any information you can share about the length of immunity of the vaccines, or any change in efficacy about various vaccines versus various strains?
So the first question, length of immunity, I mean, so far so good. The first trials were run last summer, right? Pfizer and Moderna, and those first clinical trial groups seem to have retained immunity. So I'm thinking we're going to find out at least a year. I think it'll probably be longer, but we don't really know. And the second question was about the
vaccines versus various strains.
That's another tough one. I mean, the most prevalent strain right here locally now is the UK variant. And it appears that Pfizer and Moderna are both effective against the UK variant. Again, JNJ was tested later, so it appears to be effective against the variants that were circulating at that time, which included the UK variant and the South African variant. As new variants come along, I mean, there is some concern that the vaccines may be less effective. We don't know yet. We're going to find out with time. I do know that at least Moderna and I believe Pfizer, I mean, they are anticipating that the day may come that there's a variant that their vaccine is less effective for, and they feel like they can I mean, I want to say relatively easily, how, it's all kind of magic technology to me, but relatively easily develop a booster shot that has the spike protein for those new variants. So that certainly may be in our future. I mean, this may become, and the virus isn't going to go anywhere. I mean, we are all going to live with COVID forever. It's not going to disappear from our lives. So it might be a la flu, where you need a booster every year. But one thing is for sure, I mean, variants don't evolve. Variants are created when there's no hosts. So the more people that we can get vaccinated and the less circulating virus we have, the less variants we'll see, the less variants will evolve and come to be. So that's definitely another case for vaccination in terms of if you can appeal to someone's sense of public health and community. You might not be worried about yourself. You're a young, healthy person. But the more that we can keep the virus from spreading from person to person, the less variants we'll see, the more effective the vaccines that we have will remain. Is there a plan to offer the vaccine to children? So right now, the Pfizer vaccine is approved down to age 16. We don't have the Pfizer vaccine at Union, but certainly 16 and 17-year-olds can get the Pfizer vaccine at the mass vaccination center. If you know 16 and 17-year-olds that want it, feel free to, I mean, I would suggest referring them there. I'll be honest, my son got it there last week. He's 17. They are currently, I think the Pfizer just put the requested FDA approval down to age 12. So that has to go through sort of the due process, but there is a potential that Pfizer will get approval down to age 12 as soon as May. It might be later than that. It might take longer. It depends on the evidence and how the FDA acts. So, but there's pretty good optimism that we'll be able to use a Pfizer vaccine down to age 12, even in the early part of the summer. And then I know that there are trials happening right now with Moderna and Pfizer at younger and younger ages. So the plan is, I mean, those companies want to get that approval, and we want to be able to offer this vaccine for younger children. I think it's just a matter of time. I see a question. J&J is not available now, but is there a way to request a certain vaccine? I think that just depends on where you're going to get vaccinated. I know for us right now, we're only offering Moderna. I'm not sure that we'll offer J&J again. We'll have to see. So I think it depends on where you're going in terms of requesting a certain vaccine. I would say that they're all great. I mean, I would take any vaccine, and if a patient had a concern, if a vaccine was available to them, I would take it. I don't think there's enough significant difference between them to choose one over another. Are there medications one should not take with the vaccines? And there's no contraindications to any medications for any of the vaccines. Would you be able to address any specific prevalent misinformation you have found circulating in the most vulnerable sectors of our communities? And how would you answer any of those specific concerns? Jackie, I have some thoughts, but why don't you go first, and then I'll follow up.
So we've heard a variety of concerns in the vulnerable community. And a lot of it is stemming from misinformation on social media, because they tell you, they go, oh, well, are they putting COVID in me? Are they putting a chip in me? Really more on the conspiracy side. And, the way we address that is we go to the facts. Like, these are the facts. This is what is happening with the vaccines. This is what the vaccines can do. So that kind of, you have to sort of go with the flow of where these people are at the moment and where they're gathering the information. So I do tell people that. I say, where are you getting the information? And when they tell me, oh, my cousin put this video on WhatsApp, or they put this video on Facebook, I go, well, that's not your best source of factual information. Another thing that we hear is, of course, with the African American community, there's been historic concerns with vaccination. So getting to the root question or cause of that fear and alleviating it and saying, look, this is a different time. And I like to always talk to people about, where do you want to be in a couple of months? Do you want to be able to get together with your family, go out on vacation, do these things, and really get to where we want to be as a result of being somewhat back to normal? And this is the one tool that we have in our toolbox that can really help us move, and shift to be going back to normal. And sometimes that really helps, is to put things in perspective to people, to where we were a year ago, where we were completely shut down, and how we're moving towards, opening up our community, our businesses, our schools, and being able to, sit in the backyard with your family, hug your grandchildren, and things. When you bring it to that personal level, is easier to address conspiracy theories.
I would say too, the other thing we're hearing, especially this week, is there was always concern, I think, that the JNJ vaccine was second rate, because the recommendation or the thought from the beginning of J&J was it's one dose. And so it has a great utility for certain hard to reach groups, right? But unfortunately, a lot of those hard to reach groups are also disenfranchised and minority. And so there was, I think, a little bit of perception that it was sort of a second rate vaccine anyway. And now after this week, we have real concerns that it's going to be very hard to offer it to anybody, to be honest. And if I get FaceTime with someone, I have great confidence in it. There may be some caveats to it, depending on what the FDA and the CDC comes up with over the next week regarding the risk of blood clots. But it was literally 1 in a million. And so I think that's a reasonable risk to take versus getting COVID. But I don't think it's a second rate vaccine. But I think that its reputation might have been tarnished beyond repair this past week. Luckily, we have 2 other vaccines, and they're both excellent. So.
One of the questions is in the same realm of how to talk to people. Is there specific language that you find useful to use or not use? A lot of the questions we got were around these ideas of how to have these conversations most effectively.
I go back to facts and science, and keep it at that. We have a lot of information on vaccine on our website. So if you have a chance, and we have a fact sheet on vaccine that can help you sort of talk to people about it. And like I said before, bringing it home, to the most local level in your family community. Let's not talk about the whole world or the whole, we could do that here because this is a forum for that, or the whole US. How about we just talk about your community, your really close-knit community, and how it affects it, and how we want to go back to normal.
And sometimes even greater than that, I just bring it back to you. I hear those stories of, well, I read about this person and that happened. And I said, well, you got to look at the science and the big picture and all the millions of people we vaccinated. And we need to talk about you and your individual risk for COVID and the benefits to you of getting vaccinated. And I think sometimes too, like, this is an important conversation because we all have different relationships with people. And so, sometimes you're just giving your perspective and you may help someone. Maybe you need to point someone to their doctor to talk to, or somebody else that they trust. You know what I mean? Like, so I get frustrated. I have conversations with patients every day, some of which I can convince to get a vaccine and some of which I can't. But I hope that sometimes I'm just taking them one step closer to being able to accept a vaccine, at some point in the future. So you all, I think, can play a role in that as well.
We've had a few flu vaccine clinics, and on the flip side, we've seen that of people there have been flu vaccine clinics that they saw and they didn't get it then, but there was enough familiarity, there was enough repetition that they eventually got it. And so I echo that and hope that we see a lot of that doing the same happening with COVID. So we pretty much wrapped up the questions that we had gotten submitted previously. Are there any others that are still floating out there that you want a chance to ask?
I do have a question for everyone. Is what can we as a community health center and as a partner do for you guys? How can we help you increase access to some of the vulnerable communities? Do you think that going to the max vaccination center that's fine, or do you think that having smaller pop-ups at a more local level is more effective? These are the kind of things that we like to know, because there's a lot of people working towards this, and what I'm hearing in committees that I sit in is that, some people feel more comfortable if, there's a pop-up down the street from where I live, and I can't get to Park City, or I'll feel more confident if it's in my church, and we've done it in a lot of church environments. So what do you think you're hearing in some of your communities that we could assist?
Maybe I can share our experience here in New Holland. We're lucky to have a union community care office here that most people know as Welsh Mountain. And when I got a call from Jackie, because I'm on the board of union, saying, who can we call to put this together? And I made a couple of contacts in the community, and we had one person who is an RN who put together a Google sheet, spreadsheet that she could share with a number of us. We started making phone calls to the people who were vulnerable, who were not technologically capable of getting online and finding a place, or they didn't have their transportation issues, or there just was a fear of leaving a community to go someplace to get a vaccine. We were successful with our church, which is Trinity Lutheran in New Holland, and CrossNet Ministries, which is a local faith-based social service agency, and the dementia-friendly community. I think we've vaccinated about 172 people who would probably have struggled to get access to the vaccine, and we did it at the office here. The office staff at Union accommodated us with times, us meaning the community, with time and welcoming, even though most people weren't patients. And we were very successful in getting a lot of people vaccinated. And we're still getting calls, although it's kind of dropped off. I don't know. What I don't know is how to reach out to people who are still waiting, who haven't heard about what we can do here through Union in New Holland. But that's our experience. It worked very well, and I very much appreciate it. And as do the people that we've been able to vaccinate. Union Community Care's outreach to their community.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else have any questions, comments, or how can we reach out to some of these vulnerable communities, or not only vulnerable, but also people that have less access? Like if you're in a community where it's more rural and transportation could be a barrier, those are the kind of places that we want to target and make sure that they have access.
My name is Mark, and I've been working with a hospital in Chester County, part of the Penn Medical System, and we have been reaching out to leaders within our Latino community here. A number of us who are Spanish speakers, asking them to form form groups and working with them to get those groups scheduled with the intention of vaccinating, as you've already talked about, individuals who can be influencers in their community. We've had a number of pastors and other lay leaders in the church communities who have been vaccinated through this effort. And we have hospitality teams waiting at the hospital for those scheduled groups, ready to receive them and walk them through the process in Spanish, in order that they feel comfortable and cared for in that process. And that has been very meaningful to be a part of, and I think very effective. And we've watched those groups reach back out, and even including some folks who were skeptical coming in, now asking, how can my other friends and family members be vaccinated? It's been effective and helpful, just one small way that we've been involved.
Excellent.
Dr. Ann, do you see the one more question in the chat? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, someone was asking about what happens if I don't feel sick after my shots? And the answer is that's fine. That's wonderful. Lucky you. There doesn't really mean anything in terms of the effectiveness of the shot. It's just, I think, important for people to be aware that side effects are not uncommon. It's not COVID. A lot of times it's good to have that conversation, like from my perspective, especially a 2-shot series. You hate for someone to have side effects after shot 1 and then not want to get shot 2, because it's really not an effective vaccine with just 1 shot. But yep, not if you don't have side effects, you win.
Well, it seems like we've kind of hit our stopping point and we're getting close to the end of our hour. So thank you so much to Jackie and Dr. Ann for joining us today. We really appreciated your input. I think you've helped us all in how we can continue these conversations. We will send out the link to the recording to everybody, as well as Jackie's contact information. If you do have ideas of partnering in your communities, they would love to have that conversation with you, and we will make sure you can get in touch. So thank you all for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.